Well, hi, Ms. Duster. It is an honor to be able to talk with you. I'm Givonna Joseph, and I'm founder and artistic director of Opera Creole here in New Orleans. We are celebrating our 10th anniversary. For 10 years, we have been putting history on its feet through music and through connecting music to other historical matters. So we decided for our 10th anniversary, because my daughter and I, she's ill and won't be able to be here, Aria Mason. We've been working hard as Black women for 10 years, putting this company together and forging new territory and breaking boundaries. We wanted to celebrate Black women, and especially Black women in civil rights and Black women in opera who have been connected to civil rights. So there's other great connections here. My in-laws have some connections in civil rights in Mississippi. My daughter's great-great-great-grandmother was a choral composer in Chicago, and she published a piece with Thomas A. Dorsey. So, and my mother-in-law was was of two women chosen to go to the ERA convention. She was the only Black delegate. So, so we have some ties there in regard to that. So it's good to see you. I should just tell you, Opera Creole is not the typical opera company. We're dedicated to researching and performing lost or rarely performed works by composers of African descent. We, in the last 10 years, have unearthed things that were lost by 100 years and brought things to America for the first time, and definitely highlighted the history of 19th century New Orleans free composers of color and our great history in classical music and opera that has been ignored. So that's kind of what we do. So we're here on our 10th anniversary, and my daughter has long had a passion for Ida B. Wells. She has a degree in history and a degree in music, and so she was the first to start talking to me about Ida B. Wells and definitely wanted this concert to focus on her. So New Orleans also has a lot of other great history. I found out when I created an opera celebrating New Orleans' 300th birthday that my family's signatures were on a petition to Abraham Lincoln for the right to vote after the Civil War. So New Orleans has, for many, many years, been on the forefront of civil rights. And you know about Homer Plessy, who was just received his pardon after so many 100-something years. And the freedom fighters were here. And as a matter of fact, one of my singers was in Chicago doing the production of A Freedom Ride at the Chicago Lyric, and he will be back again in the spring to do another production with them. So, but I want to start with a story, and then I'll have a question. I know I've been talking. So, a story in New Orleans, 1903. Susan B. Anthony and Dorothy Dix chose New Orleans as the host site for the National American Women's Suffrage Association's annual meeting. But our Black Suffrage Club, the Phyllis Wheatley Club, was not invited. Somehow, Susan B. Anthony and Ms. Dix came and visited the club and brought a little small contingent with them. And so the president, the Black president, Sylvanie Williams, spoke to them about what she says a Black woman is in terms of a flower that is trodden upon. So I thought about that story, and so much of that story made me think of Miss Wells. Of course, we know 10 years later, there was a great triumphal thing that she did in Washington, D.C. And can you talk with us about that a little bit, especially from her perspective, what it felt like?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Ms. Joseph. And I'm so excited about the Opera Creole enthusiasm for my great-grandmother. As you know, she also wrote a pamphlet called Malbarul in New Orleans about Robert Charles that happened in the city. So she has an entire pamphlet that she wrote about your city. But as far as the the march that she participated in, the suffrage march in 1913 that happened the day before the inauguration of Woodrow Wilson. And women from all over the country were invited to basically put pressure on the incoming president to finally pass the rights for women to vote. And so my great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells, was part of the Illinois contingency delegation that went to the march. And it was an integrated delegation from Illinois. But once they arrived in Washington, D.C., they were informed that the organizers of the march had requested that Black women march in the back of the parade. And so there was a big commotion within the Illinois delegation about how they should handle that request. And ultimately, my great-grandmother, from what I understand from the research that I've done for both of the books that I've written about her, she sort of fake agreed to honor that request. But then the day of the parade, she couldn't be found. And ultimately what happened was that she walked alongside the parade route and came out of the crowd and inserted herself into the front of the Illinois delegation. So she effectively integrated the parade. And you know what's so interesting is that she actually did not write about that in her autobiography. I had to do research from other sources in order to even learn the details of what happened. And that made me think she didn't think it was a big deal, which is amazing because now today, people marvel at, the courage and the strength that it took for her to do that. But somehow I think in her mind, she was like, that was just another day, being a rebel.
Well, as I was planning this concert, I started thinking about that date, March 3rd, 1913. And I realized something else wonderful happened in Illinois on March 3rd, 1913. The composer, Margaret Bonds, was born. And the music of Margaret Bonds became the voice of the people. It galvanized the people. It was the cradle for our ambition and our hopes and our loves and our distress. And so I think that those two things coming together just spoke to me in a really great way. Something that I had forgotten that I remember just as I was coming here. There was a World Exposition in Chicago, 1893, if I'm remembering correctly, that she protested because African Americans were not included. But I see that the Black opera singer, Sister Retta Jones, did perform. And I'm wondering if that happened because Frederick Douglass got involved after your grandmother's protest. Would you have any information on that? I have forgotten all about it.
Well, from what I understand about the World's Fair was that it wasn't like there were no Black people at all who participated. The issue that my great-grandmother and Frederick Douglass and Irvine Garland Penn and Ferdinand Barnett, the four of them co-wrote a pamphlet called The Reason Why the Colored American is Not in the World's Columbian Exposition. They co-wrote that pamphlet to protest what they considered to be meaningful participation for African Americans when it came to organizing the fair and to have exhibitions in the fair that were representative of the contributions that African Americans had actually made to the country. Because the whole point of the World's Fair was to sort of celebrate 30 years after the Civil War, to celebrate progress of the United States after the Civil War. And the four of them felt that the contributions that African Americans had made to this country were greatly underrepresented at the World's Fair. And so and in addition to that, some of the representation that was at the fair, they felt was very insulting. There were exhibitions of sort of the progress of man with, Black people at the bottom and white people at the top of the sort of hierarchy. So there was a lot of issues going on with the fair. So that's not to say that Sister Rita Jones was not there, or other people like Paul Laurence Dunbar, but it was just very underrepresented.
Absolutely. And I have to say, the timeline of all of her accomplishments, just reading that in the book, just made me tired and feel like I have no idea of how much work she withstood. So it just inspired me to know that I'm not the only one tired, and I'm not as tired as she was. Was there any music that spoke to her? Were there any organizations in terms of musical clubs or that supported her work? Or can you talk a little bit about music scene of Chicago a little bit?
Well, when I was doing my research for Ida B. the Queen in particular, one of my goals with the book was to humanize her, humanize my great-grandmother for the audience, for the readers, and for myself, because I feel like people sort of make her into almost superhuman person. And that can be a little intimidating, I think, for people to feel like, well, they can't even relate to her because she was so extraordinary. And so I was looking for information that would, make her sort of, show another side of her, besides all of her, founding every organization and participating in so many different publications, like the Memphis Free Speech and the New York Age and the Chicago Defender and the Conservator, and, just on and on. And so her journal that she kept when she was in Memphis as a young woman in her 20s was more revealing when it came to her sort of personal taste and her social life and things like that. She didn't mention any particular songs that she liked, but she definitely was a very big theater goer. And she used her journal to sort of give for her own self, she would give critiques of performances that she attended, or lectures that she attended, or speeches that she heard, books that she wrote, that she read. She would kind of write down her thoughts about it. And so, I could gather from that she was a very big theater goer in Memphis. And then after she relocated to Chicago, she was very active later in her life in helping to sort of reopen and establish the Pekin Theater. But she, in her autobiography, it was about 2 paragraphs, that she wrote about it. So I've had to kind of read between the lines to figure out exactly what happened. So it was interesting doing research on her of what she chose to focus on and what she kind of glossed over. And, I can only sort of surmise that some things she glossed over, maybe in her mind, it wasn't a big deal. But for us today, it's like, I want to know more. So that's all, I really have to work with.
Yeah. And I saw somewhere that Louis Armstrong may have performed at the Pekin Theater. So, that's our claim to fame, if that is true. But I thought the controversy of her forming this theater in a neighborhood that some of the hoity-toities were not really happy about, or the guy associated with the theater, and she chastised them for being hypocrites, that we're supposed to speak to all the people. And for me, that's how I see opera. People think of opera as this elite thing, and they're over there, and they're singing in these languages. You don't know what they're doing, and they don't care about the community. But that's absolutely not true. And one of the things that we highlight in this concert is Coretta Scott King's concert for, to raise money for the movement, and Marian Anderson and all of those people who were galvanizing forces for the movement, and how we have put our dollars and our hearts and our songs in that direction. Mm-hmm. I think about the fact that now this beautiful monument was built. so many accolades are being given to her, even a Barbie doll, I understand. Is that right? Have to get one. But, I think back on the fact that the FBI thought she was the most dangerous person of her race. And I was reflecting on how we should maybe speak to today as how harshly those who protest for our rights are judged. And maybe we should look at them differently and find ways that we could lift them up. I mean, what do you think Ms. Wells would say about this day and time?
Well, I mean, per my research that I did for my books, Ida B. the Queen and Ida B. Wells' Voice of Truth, which is a children's picture book. I mean, I can only, go by what she actually did during her lifetime. And she did face an awful lot of criticism, during her lifetime. There were a lot of people who really had a problem with her. They felt she was too outspoken and too bold and, too confident, and just a lot of things that people say about women, and specifically that refuse to be sort of meek and mild and agreeable, all of these things that some people think women should be. So I do think she was judged a little bit more harshly than a man would have been who was doing the same thing that she was doing. But as far as what she would think today, she might be surprised by what's going on, considering in order for her to do the work she did, she had to believe that it would make a difference. She had to be an optimist. Otherwise, why even, spend 50 years of your life fighting for, freedom, justice, and equality? She, obviously was a journalist, and she used her voice in journalism to expose the truth about what was going on during her time, which was domestic terrorism. It was absolutely domestic terrorism. These mob rules, these vigilante kind of acts that were committed against the African-American community, most of the times with impunity. And so she lived during a time of absolute lawlessness. And so, some people were intimidated by what was going on, and she made it clear, if you read through her writings, that she literally was willing to die, to stand up for her convictions. And so, a lot of people aren't willing to die for what they believe in, but she clearly felt that she was not going to accept being second-class citizen. And she was willing to speak up and fight for her first-class citizenship right, which was the right to vote, the right to a fair education, the right to have protection, equal protection under the law, equal housing. I mean, there were so many issues that she was fighting for.
And her
unfortunately, a lot of people,
the anti-lynching campaign is just phenomenal. And I think you referenced that she says something like, she's the only woman all over the globe with a nursing baby going to fight, as my daughter would say, to jump on other people's nerves. But it made me think about your great-grandfather. What an amazing man he was, because he didn't subscribe to any of the norms of that day. He was a feminist and supported her, and well accomplished himself, and supported her that she could do what she needed to do. The hyphenation of the name, I mean, they were showing us how to do it. Talk about him a little bit, and talk about how your family is continuing to push those boundaries and to do this work.
Well, my great-grandfather's name was Ferdinand Barnett. And he was a widower when he met who ultimately became his wife, my great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells Barnett. He was a widower with 2 young children. And he obviously was attracted to strong women who were trailblazers and, defied social norms at that time because his first wife was also a trailblazer. She was the first Black woman to graduate from the University of Michigan. So he just was attracted to strong women. And he was a widower for quite a few years before he finally decided to get remarried. And from what we understand, he literally was, looking for another strong woman. Of course, he had a lot of women who were like, "Hello, I'm available," but he was like, "Nope, not you." So he wanted somebody like Ida, and she was at the peak of her, if you want to call it fame, when he met her. So clearly he was not intimidated by her being a public figure, by her having so many demands on her time. He knew what he was getting himself into, and he encouraged her to, be her, and supported her in the ways that he could to free up her time, to give her the space and the ability in between having 4 children to do her thing. And so I grew up knowing that he was the main cook in the family. While she was off, giving speeches and traveling around, he was cooking and holding down the fort at home. So they really were very unusual as a couple. But he also was an attorney. So she was an attorney, and he was the founder of the first Black-owned newspaper in Chicago. So he was very accomplished in his own right, but he was okay being in the background, which is very unusual.
Well, funny story. I was working with some educators in Ohio remotely, and they wanted to learn how to write little mini operas in their classroom. If they gave the students a subject, how could they show them how to turn it into something operatic? And I found your book just at the time we were doing that. And so my group, there were several of us who were working with the Muse Machine of Ohio, but my group actually came up with their own plot, but they put Ida B. Wells in the plot. And so I hope that went back to the classroom with them. They were very determined to bring it back and to teach the students about that. So I'm very proud of it. Really. And speaking of which, is anybody thinking of writing an opera about her?
People have approached me and other members of my family with a whole lot of different ideas about how they would like to tell her story. So, an opera is one form that we have been approached about. But so far as we know, there has not been one created. Well, one of the things that I did in Ida B. the Queen specifically, which is geared towards teenage and up, was I have an entire section in the book. It's broken into 7 different sections. And so in section 6, for those who are looking for it, I was very specific to interweave the work that my great-grandmother did and connect her to people who've come after her, to show sort of the through line between the work that she did and all the way to Black Lives Matter movement of today, including Kamala Harris becoming Vice President of the United States. When she stands on shoulders and Kamala Harris recognizes that she stands on the shoulders of Black women who were in the suffrage movement. And so my hope with that section, where I talk about, controlling your own narrative and organizing and, fighting for the right to vote, all these different things that, my hope with that section is that younger people specifically can get ideas from that section on how they can go about making an impact on their own community, and more contemporary people that they might have heard of, that that is sort of following in my great grandmother's footsteps. Even if they weren't conscious of it, they're kind of doing work that is along the lines of what she was doing. For instance, Colin Kaepernick. I have a section on standing alone. Sometimes, and which is what my great grandmother did. Sometimes you have to stand alone, be willing to stand alone for what you believe in. And so I have multiple examples of current people or people that are not as current, but still, after my great grandmother, like Marcus Garvey, for instance. So there are multiple people that I think it's important for people to see the progress.
Yeah. The funny thing is, when we decided to name the concert from Ida B to Kamala, I hadn't gotten to the back section of the book yet, and then I saw that she was there. One of the things I thought about in terms of Kamala Harris, the first year of an administration, the VP usually has to take a back step because the president has to set his agenda and show his success and that sort of thing. And I'm already seeing people getting angry with her, maybe in the way that they would not get angry with other vice presidents because of this how the structure is done. And there are things that she needs to do. So how can we best support her and make sure she gets the agenda done? What do you think about that?
I think she's in a tough situation, honestly, because our country has so many challenges right now, and people are impatient. They want issues to be solved yesterday, and that's not really possible. And so, and I think some of the issues that she has sort of been assigned have been around for a really long time, and nobody before her has been able to solve them. So to expect her to step into this role and solve a problem that's like 100 years old and solve it in 2 months is, a little unrealistic. So I think there needs to be a management of expectations, in general. And I personally see, that dynamic happening not just with Kamala, but several Black women who have stepped into leadership roles around the country, who have inherited enormous challenges, and and so I have seen a lack of patience with Black women, whereas the people who preceded them, there was not the same level of criticism or the same level of expectation to just step in there and solve everything. We're expected to be superheroes, and so I just think, I don't know how to solve the problem. I don't know what to, kind of advice to give her, but I just think as a country, she and other women in these leadership positions need to be given time to solve the problems that didn't just come up, yesterday. They've been around for a long time. So I could go on, but I think that overall, I think she's in a tough position.
Well, I don't know how we're doing time-wise, but I'm so, so, so grateful to have the opportunity to talk to you, because I could not believe the way this book just came to me and how she has been on my heart, my daughter's heart, for so long, and wanting to talk about her, especially as the big push to celebrate the suffragists were coming, and I kept saying, say the name. So we wanted to make sure that we stood her up, and we're very proud of her, and we know that your family is still working hard. I know her children kept things going. Your grandmother kept things going, and we appreciate that, and we appreciate your continuing to do the research to tell us more about her, because we want to learn, and we want to make this country what it should be.
Right. Well, this is a lot of work. There are 4 generations of my family who have been involved over 90 years to help this country remember, honor, celebrate my great grandmother. And, so my grandmother started with editing and getting her mother's autobiography published. And then my father's generation started the Ida B. Wells Memorial Foundation in 1988. And then my generation, I'm the most active, writing books and, getting monuments created and statues and street names and a Barbie doll. So I've been all over the place, and I've worked on a couple of films about her. And then the next generation after me, one of my cousins actually wrote a play. So there are 4 generations of our family who are working to make sure that, this country remembers our ancestor, but I will just speak for myself. My goal is not only focused specifically on my great grandmother. It's more about uplifting Black women in general, because she had contemporaries. She had people that came before her and people who've come after her. And that was one of the things that I tried to do with the timeline in Ida B. the Queen, was just to show that she didn't come out of nowhere. There were people who came before her that she learned from, and the struggle continues. So just to kind of put it into historical context.
Well, my granddaughter was born on March 25th, the date that Miss Wells passed in 2020. And so we are hoping maybe she will also have that spark and go forward. So thank you very much. I won't keep you any longer. I appreciate your time and appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.